in some ways reminds us of the beginning of the book of Genesis, because of the words, in the beginning, etc. So we do see connections between the beginning of the Gospel, the prologue, and the beginning of the Old Testament. Just a few little comments now, going through this prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was turned towards God. And what God was, the Word also was. That's Father Francis Maloney's translation. It's rather beautiful because it sort of points out, and his translation more accurately turned towards gives us what the Greek means. And it more accurately tells us of the loving union between the Word and God. The intimate communion which is experienced between Jesus and his Father. And the Word always speaks out of this intimacy towards us. What took place in him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. Though this Word, close to God, breaks into the human story and made life an ongoing possibility for us. And life in St. John's Gospel means that deep intimacy with God, heart to heart with God. John's going to lead us. Jesus rather is going to lead us, says John, into the heart of God. We'll just mention one or two other phrases in this introduction. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. Now, if we remember in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, when Moses asked to see God's glory, he was told, "You can't see my face, for no one shall see me and live." So Moses was given the law. And so, as it were, he saw God's back, not his face. He saw the pathway to follow, but he couldn't see God's face. But the beloved disciple has seen the face of Jesus. He has gazed on him, and Jesus' words found a home in his heart. No one has ever seen God, etc. John is telling us that God is speaking to us perfectly in Jesus. If we listen to him, he'll tell us not only who God truly is, but who we are too. He'll tell us how to enter into dialogue with God and how to enjoy the intimacy that he himself always experiences. So one day then we shall see God too, face to face. Jesus is turned towards the Father all through his life. So that's a little bit just on the prologue, to get a feel for that magnificent poem. And now the final thing I'd like to spend a bit of time on is the first days of Jesus. The series of days, the next day this, the next day that, the next day that. The series of days has been noted by scholars. Some have linked them with the 7 days of creation. God is preparing a new creation in Jesus. Others don't see any significance whatsoever in the days. Just something new happens. Father Francis Maloney, something I was drawn to, sees the background in Exodus chapter 19, when the law is given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and where God's glory is revealed. As the Jewish people celebrated this, it was the feast of the Pentecost, and there were 4 days before the glory of the Lord was revealed. And so it is that God's glory is revealed at Cana, the wedding of Cana in Galilee, where, at the conclusion of this scene, this is what is said. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory. The glory of God at Mount Sinai, and his disciples believed in him. So most scholars would say that the miracle of Cana culminates the first week of Jesus' ministry, and certainly what Father Maloney says makes a lot of sense. In these first days too, you'll notice, I'm sure, that the major themes of the prologue, especially the fact that the Baptist is witnessing to Jesus, and who is Jesus, his identity, continue through these first days. So there are 4 days that we're going to speak of in chapter 1. In the first day, we have the witness of the Baptist. We start off with, the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask John, who are you? The Jews. Notice that? Not the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes, but the Jews. We know it includes the Jews because in verse 24 it said that they were part of that party that sent the priests and Levites. Now, that can sound anti-Semitic. It can. And in our history, St. John has been the source of anti-Semitic thinking. But we've got to remind ourselves that St. John is writing in post-70 AD, when the real struggle going on in Ephesus is between the church and the synagogue, between Christians and Jews. And so John will mostly say the Jews as our enemy, as the group we're struggling most against. Now John describes himself in this scene as a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord. That's who he is. That's how he sees himself in St. John. As in the other Gospels too, in many ways, but there's no emphasis on his baptizing at all. All the emphasis is on his witnessing to Jesus. And we have in this first day our first image of Jesus as, well, among you stands one whom you don't know. Now we could stay with that and think what an extraordinary image that is of Jesus. How do we get to know him? Where is he? And so on. Day 2. Again it's with the Baptist, and this time he points out Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. This Lamb, we can think of 2 references that make it mean a lot to us. The first is the Lamb of the book of Revelation, which says this: the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will guide them to the springs of living water, the springs of life. That's an extraordinary scene of the Lamb reigning in heaven. And that's, of course, who John is referring to. But also we think to the Lamb at Passover, whose blood saves us. And as we think also of that, John is also speaking of Jesus' death. He will cleanse us. He will die for us. And he's going to take us into God's embrace. This Lamb of God.